Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. My name is Shaaina, matrix number 271985, and I'll be presenting the introduction. So what is poverty? Poverty is one who lacks a standard or socially acceptable level of wealth or material things is said to be in a condition of poverty. The families whose economic status is below a minimally acceptable level. The poverty line income is used to calculate the level of absolute poverty, PLI. So poverty has three different types, which are absolute poverty, relative poverty, and multidimensional poverty. So the first one is absolute poverty, which described as a situation when a household's gross monthly income is insufficient to cover the cost of some basic necessities. According to the Malaysian government, household earning below RM 980 in Peninsula, RM 1020 for Sarawak, and RM 180 for Sabah are considered as absolute poor. Second, relative poverty, which addresses the distributional aspect of poverty by articulating the minimum standards in terms of the average living standards of society. So according to the 2016 data, the threshold for relative poverty would then be a household income of RM 3,100. Lastly, people who are poor and experience multiple problems such as poor health, terrible work conditions, a lack of access to electricity and clean water, inadequate living standards, and living in unsafe locations are said to be experiencing multidimensional poverty. Next, what is income distribution? Well, the ease or equality which revenue is distributed among the people in a society is known as income distribution. When discussing the distribution of income, there are two extremes: distribution that is completely equal and distribution that is completely unequal.
In this part, I will explain on the theories related to tax and income distribution. First is tax incidence. Does the burden of the tax being distributed equally among the society? Generally, taxation system will impose burden to the society. In reality, the normative issue, such as this issue, is very difficult to measure because the distribution of income to the society involves two different tax incidents. It is statutory and economic tax incident, and the difference between these two incidents is known as tax shifting. Statutory was being defined as group is legally responsible of the tax as stated by law. In contrast, economic tax incident means who is actually bear the burden of the tax, and this can be answered by analyzing the effect of taxation on the real income. Next, we will discuss how tax affect the way in which total income is distributed among people. Incidence depends on change in price, but change takes time. In most cases, responses are larger in the long run than the short run. In some cases, incidence also depend on the disposition of tax revenue. In general, the distributional effect of tax depend on how the government spend the money. Tax revenue are usually not earmarked for particular expenditure. Second topic, I will analyze partial equilibrium model of price determination, which is model that looks only at the market in which the tax is imposed and ignore the ramifications in other market. This kind of analysis is most appropriate when the market for the tax commodity is relatively small compared to the economy as a whole. I'm going to analyze one type of tax, which is unit tax. The incidence of a unit tax of commodity names because it is levied as a fixed amount per unit of a commodity sold. A key step in incidence analysis is to recognize that in the presence of a tax, the price paid by consumer and the price received by supplier differ. Previously, we could use a supply-demand analysis to determine the single market price. Now, this analysis must be modified to accommodate two different prices, one for buyer and one for seller. In figure 1, we could see price and quantity before taxation. A unit tax of $U per gallon changed the demand curve as perceived by supplier. For example, the maximum price per gallon that people are willing to pay for is. After the tax, when people pay per gallon, producer only receive per gallon, which corresponded to point B. The new demand curve is located exactly $U below the old one. Next is figure 2 show that incidence of a unit tax imposed on the demand side. After the imposition of the unit tax on consumers, the new equilibrium quantity is the price received by producer, and the price paid by consumer is plus U, which is after the imposition of the tax. There will be two equilibrium price. Firstly, the price that is relevant to or received by producer is Pn or P prod, is where the supply curve S intersect with D prime or D prod, which is the demand curve which is relevant to producer. Secondly, the price which is relevant to consumer is P prod plus U, where U is unit tax. Hence, the price paid by consumer is PG or Pcon. Geometrically, this is just the vertical distance of P prod up until it touches the demand curve relevant to consumer, which is DW or Dcon. I will pass to my friend Iza. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Iza and matric number is 271905. I will continue in explaining regarding the theory related to the tax and income distribution. So I will explain about general equilibrium model. So under general equilibrium model, there is a tax equilibrium relation. So the tax equilibrium relation is the idea of dealing with tax incident in a general equilibrium framework at first appears daunting. The most well-known example is tax levied on market transactions should have the same effect whether levied on the customer or the producer. So to explain more about the tax equilibrium relation, I will elaborate about this figure. Based on the figure 1, imposing a unit tax at rate at TT on seller raises the supply curve from SS to SS prime, while imposing the same tax on buyers reduce the demand curve from DD to D prime. Purchases decrease from Q0 to Q1. The buyer tax inclusive price increase to P2. The seller after flex prices decrease to P1, and government revenue equal to TTQ1. The only difference between the two outcomes is that when consumer pay the tax, the observed one market falls to P1, and when producer pay the tax, the observed one market price rises to P2. Even though market price fluctuated, agents and government financial limitation and economic incentive, as well as the eventual equilibrium, remain unaltered. Individual and company behavioral elasticities apply similarly across numerous versions of the comparable policy, implying that the incidence and efficiency consequences of the two tax policies are also the same. This equivalence assumes the absence of real-world factors that could cause it to fail, such as restriction on market price movement, for example, a minimum wage or bargaining institution frictions. Differences in the salience of the two tax among market participants, and differences in the cost of taxpayer compliance or tax administration. Without such distinctions, choosing between two options would be arbitrary. Selecting one technique over the two may have advantages in both cases, which is why determining equivalence is critical in the first place. Political inequalities can exist for a variety of reasons, such as allowing one system to disguise tax more than the other. That's all from me. I will pass to the next presenter.
Hi, so here I would like to explain about the Malaysia tax and income redistribution. So based on the table, so we can describe the poverty in Malaysia recorded is a decrease from 3.6% to 0.6%, and but household income in Malaysia also decreased from 2007 to 2014. So the decreased household income from the 49.8% to 46.1%. It is assumed that the household poverty is reduced, but people still have the low income. So the strategy to eradicate the financial problem faced by the community need to be addressed immediately. Okay, the next one is the strategy to overcome the poverty. So the first one is economic development is the most effective way to overcome the poverty. So the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund recommended the economic development as the most important factor to overcoming poverty. So development plan under the new economic policy are formulated and implemented through the true broad strategy as reduce and further eradicate poverty by the increasing opportunity job to all citizens. And the second one is extermination program. Poverty has been widely implemented in the country. For comparison, in the United States countermeasure program, poverty is a direct to increase interstate economic cooperation, improve the condition and urban sentiment, and the rural area, especially of the employment opportunity. And the second one, the last one is the addresses the need of specific target group, such as the need of orang asli in the Peninsula Malaysia and those living in the rural and inland Sabah and Sarawak, has focused through the ownership and development program as
Hi, my name is Nashifa Awanis and I will continue my presentation part, which is issue in Indonesia. So I will start with first point, the comparison of income distribution. Indonesia's level of inequality is now considered to be relatively high and climbing faster than most of its East Asian neighbor. The population indicated a significant gap between people living in urban and rural areas. Furthermore, the unequal and unbalanced distribution of income among the island, with a focus on Java and Sumatra, reflect a population gap in Indonesia. Consumption per person for the richest 10% of Indonesia grew at over 6% per year after adjusting for inflation. But for the poorest 40%, consumption grew by less than 2% per year. Next, the second point is the comparison of poverty rate. Because of the country high poverty rate, poverty is one of the most serious concerns in Indonesia. According to World Data Lab, Indonesia ranked second with 5.1% extreme poverty rate. Economic growth and poverty rates in Indonesia are key indicators of a nation's development success. According to the regression coefficient, the Indonesia economic growth rate is 0.18. It means that if economic growth is increased by 1%, poverty rate will rise by 0.1%. This result is consistent with the researcher findings with revealed that an increase in poverty rate is followed by economic expansion across Asia. On the other hand, they conclude that economic expansion have a negative impact on poverty. In West Kalimantan, economic expansion has minimal impact on poverty. The greater the income inequality, the higher the poverty rate, due to the huge economic gap throughout these countries' cities, as well as the insufficient quality of institution and financial development management. As a result, effort to eliminate inequality should take priority over effort to stimulate economic development.
Assalamualaikum and hi, and I am Aina Farisha binti Muhammad Shahizam, and I will continue to explain about issues in South Africa. As stated in the World Bank, although South Africa has achieved progress in reducing poverty since 1994, the trend of poverty reduction reversed between 2011 and 2015, posing a threat to some of the progress gained since 1994. Okay, as we can see here, 55.5%, which is 30.3 million people are living below poverty line, which is the below national upper poverty line. Okay, and for your information, 25%, which is 13.8 million people are food poverty. The percentage of people living in poverty increased in 8 provinces between 2011 to 2015. Okay, South Africa is one of the world's most unequal nations with a Gini index of 63 in 2014 and 2015. Okay, since 1994, inequality has become more extreme and pervasive. Extreme levels of income polarization are characterized by extreme level of chronic poverty and a small number of high income earners and a small middle class. Okay, let's move on to the next slides. Okay, for the next slide, I will explain about tax and income distribution. The Gini coefficients for South Africa can be estimated to be 0.68. Consistent with other recent estimates, this is extremely high by international standards, but it is mitigated by a highly distributive pattern of taxation and state spending. Okay, a progressive approach to fiscal policy is one that strives to alleviate inequality. Taxes and spending in South Africa can redistribute income between the rich and the poor. Approximately 3.6 million people are pulled out of poverty because of South Africa's fiscal system, as measured by those living on less than 2.5 per day in purchasing power. Parity dollars indicators of South Africa's budgets, deficits and debt. However, indicate that the fiscal capacity to spend more accomplish even greater distribution is exceedingly constrained. To address poverty and inequality in the future in manner consistent with fiscal viability, public services will need to be of higher quality and more efficient. And that's all for me. And I will pass to my next group member to continue about the conclusions.
Hi and Assalamualaikum. My name Amira Hadira binti Nur Hasmadi. My metric number 271910. So today I will explain about the conclusion part. Whatever causes poverty, its results are devastating. Poor kids are more likely to grow up poor, drop out of high school, become parents as teens, and have employment problems. 32% of poor kids become poor adults versus 1% of never poor kids. Poor people are more prone to experience domestic violence and divorce. Stress causes numerous family problems. Managing a house, having a children, and paying bills may be difficult even for the financially stable families. Poor families suffer additional stress, which worsen ordinary family pressures. Poor families have more family troubles than wealthier ones. Poorer families are less suited to tackle these difficulties than wealthy households. Inadequate people are more likely to encounter early adult deaths, mental illness, and newborn mortality due to poor medical care. Poor nutrition relates to physical, behavioral and cognitive difficulties in low-income children, inability to excel academically, and find steady job as adults adds to generational poverty. Poor children often attend out-of-date, under-resourced schools where they got a poor education. They are less likely to finish high school or attend college than rich kids. Lack of education commits them and their children to poverty, repeating the cycle. These economic challenges are another significant result of poverty, regardless of the causes. Poor individuals are more likely to be homeless, live in bad housing, and be unable to purchase their own homes. Many low-income families spend most of their money on rent and live in locations with limited work opportunities, high-quality schools, and other things that affluent people take for granted. Taxes affect how money is allocated. Taxes affect income and redistribute in three ways. Income tax, social security, and consumer tax are direct taxes. Third is indirect taxes on purchases. Taxes affect family wages, public service financing, and consumer choices. Changing the tax system may reduce economic disparity and health inequalities. Taxes and subsidies affect family income distribution. Benefits and taxes diminish income gaps. Richer families pay more in total indirect taxes than poorer families, although paying less in indirect taxes proportional to their income. Indirect taxes may increase the income gap. Progressive taxation reduce inequality. Indirect taxes increase inequality. Direct and indirect are more progressive now. That's all from us. Thank you.